Greetings on November 19th, 1942, like a clap of thunder. Soviet artillery announced to the world the beginning of a radical turning point in the protracted and bloody Great Patriotic War. With the deafening roar of thousands of guns, a carefully planned operation codenamed Uranus commenced. Its main strategic goal was the encirclement and complete annihilation of the powerful Stalingrad grouping of Hitler's troops and their allies, bogged down in street fighting for the city. The operation developed swiftly and successfully, precisely according to the plan of the Soviet command. By November 23rd, in the area of the small but strategically important town of Kalach, the steel pincers of the Soviet troops closed, finally completing the encirclement of the exhausted enemy. Initially, immediately after the encirclement, the situation didn't seem catastrophic or hopeless to the trapped German generals, of whom, incidentally, there were more than 24. The Sixth Army of the Wehrmacht, despite the colossal losses suffered during the grueling and fierce battles for every house, for every street of Stalingrad, still retained significant combat potential and represented a formidable, well-organized fighting force. After analyzing the situation, the German command concluded that a powerful, concentrated blow to the southwest would be quite sufficient to break through the encirclement, escape the deadly steel trap, and link up with the main forces. However, there was no time for reflection or hesitation. Only a few days, sometimes it seemed only hours, remained to implement this bold, almost desperate rescue plan. Every hour of delay relentlessly diminished the already slim chances of success. German staff officers and strategists, gathered in a tense atmosphere, developed a detailed plan to save the encircled army. At first glance, the plan seemed well thought out and promising. But upon closer and more careful examination, one fatal flaw was revealed. Capable of negating all efforts, the plan for a rapid breakthrough to the southwest had one extremely vulnerable Achilles heel. During the retreat, under constant enemy fire, the troops would have to abandon a significant portion of their heavy weaponry, leaving behind valuable tanks, artillery, ammunition, and other military equipment, and more importantly from a strategic point of view, abandoning the key city, Stalingrad. At the same time, another powerful grouping of German troops, army group under the command of Field Marshal List, was waging heavy, exhausting battles in the foothills of the Caucasus, vainly trying to break through to the oil fields of Baku, vital for the German war machine. The capture of Baku's oil was one of the main objectives of the Wehrmacht's summer offensive. In the event of abandoning Stalingrad and the retreat of the Sixth Army, the German High Command would inevitably have to withdraw the forces of Army Group A from the Caucasus direction, admitting the failure of the entire summer campaign. In fact, this forced maneuver would mean a complete rollback of the Wehrmacht to the initial positions from which the ambitious summer offensive of 1942 had begun. But a strategic retreat was fraught not only with the loss of vital territories, but also with enormous, irreplaceable losses in manpower and equipment, as well as the inevitable undermining of Nazi Germany's international prestige. For Adolf Hitler, obsessed with the idea of world domination and firmly convinced of the invincibility of the German army, such a scenario was tantamount to a complete catastrophe, a true, crushing fiasco. We ask you to subscribe to our channel, like this video, so you can hear many more interesting stories about World War II and the opinions of all sides involved in these events. The commander of the encircled Sixth Army, General Friedrich Paulus, was a typical product of the German General Staff, a man brought up in the tradition of unquestioning obedience to orders and absolutely not inclined to show independence or initiative. Paulus did not dare to give the order to break through without first obtaining the sanction of the High Command. He immediately contacted Hitler's headquarters, where at that time, in a tense atmosphere, fierce debates were taking place about further actions. Initially, Paulus was given permission for an independent breakout from the Stalingrad cauldron. However, the viewpoint of Generals Keitel and Jodl soon prevailed. They categorically insisted on the need to hold positions on the Volga at all costs and to break the encirclement from the outside with the forces of other army groups. The situation was further complicated by Reichsmarschall Göring, who unexpectedly, and as it turned out later, completely unfoundedly promised to organize an air bridge for the uninterrupted supply of the encircled troops with everything necessary: ammunition, food, and medical supplies. This promise, as subsequent events showed, was absolutely impossible to fulfill and was based solely on Göring's blind faith in the power of the Luftwaffe. As a result, Paulus received a strict and unequivocal order to remain encircled, patiently awaiting help from the outside. However, the Germans failed to quickly form a powerful strike force to relieve the Sixth Army. The counteroffensive aimed at breaking the encirclement began only on December 12th. The German troops, assembled with great difficulty, managed to approach the encircled grouping by 35 to 40 kilometers, overcoming the stubborn resistance of the Soviet troops. But their further advance stalled. The initial enthusiasm of the offensive dried up, and the relieving forces were completely exhausted. The most critical moment arrived, when the encircled still had a theoretical opportunity to save themselves by launching a sudden and powerful counterattack. But even in this seemingly absolutely hopeless situation, Paulus lacked the courage and determination to disobey the Führer's direct order and save his army at the cost of open insubordination. The order, codenamed Thunderclap, which was supposed to throw the encircled Sixth Army into a last, desperate attack towards Manstein's advancing troops, was never given. Instead, a new, unsubstantiated promise of imminent and inevitable help came from the Führer's headquarters, and Paulus, like a disciplined soldier, continued to wait, having repelled the persistent attempts to relieve the Sixth Army. The Soviet troops were able to concentrate all their forces and resources on the final destruction of the encircled enemy grouping. On January 9th, 1943, the command of the Sixth Army, which found itself in a hopeless situation, was presented with an ultimatum to surrender, guaranteeing all those who surrendered the preservation of life, normal food, and necessary medical care. But Paulus, bound hand and foot by Hitler's iron orders, once again demonstrated his unquestioning obedience to the Führer's will and categorically refused to surrender. In response to this refusal, the Red Army launched a powerful, crushing offensive, as a result of which, on January 26th, the encircled German forces were cut into two isolated parts, deprived of the opportunity to interact with each other. On January 25th, on the eve of this fateful division, Paulus held his last meeting with the commanders of the encircled units. Many generals, clearly aware of the hopelessness of their situation and the inevitability of their imminent death, openly advocated for an attempt at a desperate breakout from the encirclement, in small, scattered groups, in the blind hope that at least some of them would miraculously manage to break through the dense ranks of the Soviet troops and escape. But even at this extremely critical moment, when the lives and deaths of thousands of German soldiers were at stake, Paulus lacked the mental strength and courage to act against Hitler's will, disobey his order, and give his subordinates a chance for salvation. From that moment on, each German soldier trapped in the Stalingrad cauldron effectively had only two options: to die in a senseless, doomed battle, wasting his life uselessly, or to surrender to the Red Army, choosing between captivity and certain death. On January 20th, General von Arnim, commander of the 116th Infantry Division, surrendered to the Soviets. This was the first instance in the history of the Great Patriotic War when a German general surrendered to the Red Army. This fact clearly demonstrated the tragedy and hopelessness of the situation of the encircled German troops. Now the same fate threatened another 22 German and 2 Romanian generals trapped in the cauldron. On January 30th, 1943, the 10th anniversary of the Nazis' rise to power in Germany, Hitler, trying to indirectly push Paulus to suicide and thus avoid the shame of the capture of a high-ranking German officer, promoted him to the rank of Field Marshal in the same radiogram. In addition to congratulations, there was a rather transparent hint that until now, no German field marshal had ever surrendered to enemy captivity. However, contrary to the Führer's expectations, Paulus refused to commit suicide, and the next day, January 31st, along with his staff, exhausted, hungry, and having lost all hope, surrendered to the Soviet troops on February 2nd, 1943. Organized resistance in the Cauldron finally ceased. 24 generals, including one field marshal, 21 Wehrmacht generals, and 2 Romanian army generals were taken prisoner by the Soviets. The Battle of Stalingrad ended in a complete and unconditional victory for the Soviet troops. Why did only one German general not surrender? Of all the generals encircled in Stalingrad, only one preferred death by his own hand to what he considered the shameful captivity. This was Lieutenant General Gunther Engern, holder of the Knight's Cross, which he received in August 1940 of the 23 enemy generals. Only he did not lose his presence of mind and did not flinch in the face of inevitable death. What prompted him to such a desperate act? Let's try to understand the motives of this man by turning to the history of his life and military career. Gunther Engern was born in the city of Coburg on March 5, 1893. In 1911, following the family tradition of serving the fatherland, he joined the ranks of the German Imperial Army as a Fahnenjunker, beginning his military path. With the outbreak of World War I in 1914, young Engern was drafted into the infantry and immediately sent to the front, where his courage, decisiveness, and devotion to military duty were fully revealed. For his courage and bravery shown in fierce battles, he was awarded the Iron Cross Second and First Class, earning the respect of his colleagues in command. Engern finished World War I with the rank of Oberleutnant, having gained valuable combat experience that determined his further fate. After the heavy and humiliating defeat of Germany in World War I, Engern, unbroken and not having lost faith in the revival of his country's power, joined the army of the Weimar Republic, continuing his military career. With the Nazis' rise to power and the creation of the Wehrmacht, Engern transferred to the new army, where his military talents and unconditional loyalty were highly valued. In 1935, he received the rank of lieutenant colonel, taking a significant step forward in his career. During the swift Polish campaign of 1939, Gunther Engern, commanding a rifle brigade, once again proved himself to be an exceptionally capable and brave officer, skillfully leading his units and achieving the set goals. For the decisiveness and personal courage he displayed, he was promoted to colonel on December 7, 1939, receiving recognition for his services to the fatherland. During the French campaign of 1940, on May 23rd, thanks to his energetic and competent actions in the Arras area, German troops managed to capture 2 strategically important bridges across the Scarpe River, which played a decisive role in the subsequent offensive 5 days later. Under his command, the well-fortified Westcapelle Castle, a key point in the French defense, was taken. Over the next few days, units under Engern's commanding leadership successfully captured 2 important bridgeheads, ensuring the further advance of German troops deep into French territory. It was these brilliant combat achievements and his demonstrated military talent that served as the basis for awarding Gunther Engern the prestigious Knight's Cross, a high award bestowed only upon the bravest and most worthy officers of the Wehrmacht. Gunther Engern met the beginning of the Great Patriotic War in the Command Reserve, awaiting his assignment to the front. Already on August 15, 1941, he was appointed commander of the 11th Panzer Division, joining the very maelstrom of combat operations on the Eastern Front. On August 24, 1941, in one of the battles, Engern was wounded and sent to the rear for treatment. During his treatment, he was promoted to the rank of Major General. which testified to the high appraisal of his command qualities and combat experience. On September 10th, 1942, after his recovery, Angren was transferred to the headquarters of the 16th Panzer Division, and on September 15th, he headed this division, assuming full responsibility for its combat readiness and successful actions at the front. Angren spent the entire arduous Battle of Stalingrad, with its inhuman conditions, constant fighting, hunger, and cold, in the encircled city, sharing all the hardships and deprivations with his soldiers. He personally directed the defense of his positions, showing extraordinary resilience, courage, and devotion to his duty. On January 21st, 1943, in the midst of the fighting in the cauldron, he was awarded the rank of Lieutenant General, which was a recognition of his outstanding merits and undisputed command talent in the most difficult conditions. And then came February 2nd, 1943. The official version states that on this day, Gunther Angren committed suicide, preferring death to captivity. However, there is an alternative version, according to which Angren died in battle, leading a desperate attempt to break through the remnants of his division from the territory of the Reinforced Concrete Products Plant, ZHBI, to the area of the Stalingrad Tractor Factory, STZ, where General Strecker's grouping was still resisting. Be that as it may, Lieutenant General Gunther Angren died a hero's death, remaining true to his military oath to his last breath. If we adhere to the main version about Angren's conscious decision to refuse captivity and commit suicide, then several possible explanations for his act can be suggested. The Battle of Stalingrad was the first case of mass surrender of German generals to Soviet captivity. Before this, such a practice on such a scale did not exist. This was the first such large cauldron in which German troops on the Eastern Front found themselves. Given the cruelty of the war and the propaganda on both sides, Angren could reasonably fear that, as a high-ranking officer, regardless of rank, awards, and epaulets, he would face inevitable reprisal and severe punishment for the war crimes and atrocities committed by the Nazis on Soviet soil. He could consider death by his own hand a more worthy end than shameful captivity, public trial, and possible execution. He might also have been counting on posthumous recognition of his merits and the awarding of the highest military orders of the Third Reich, which he did not manage to receive during his lifetime. Another possible explanation for his decision could be the unwillingness to bear responsibility for the deaths of his soldiers and the defeat of the division entrusted to him. Perhaps he considered himself guilty of what had happened and did not want to look into the eyes of those who survived this bloody meat grinder. Suicide in this case could have been an act of self-sacrifice and an attempt to atone for his guilt before his fallen comrades. Finally, purely psychological factors should not be discounted. Prolonged encirclement, constant stress, hunger, cold, the death of comrades. All this could undermine the general's mental health and push him to such a desperate step. In any case, the story of Lieutenant General Gunther Angren remains one of the most mysterious and tragic pages of the Battle of Stalingrad. His decision to commit suicide or die in battle remains a subject of debate and discussion among historians to this day. However, regardless of the true reasons for his death, he is remembered as a brave and decisive officer who fulfilled his military duty to the end. Goodbye. We were glad to see you on our channel. Don't forget to write comments, like, and subscribe to the channel.